start this conversation by telling us what is one trend, one of the many trends, but what is the one trend that you feel is impacting your businesses the most today? Who wants to go first?
I'm happy to kick off. Good morning, everyone. Delighted to be here with all of you. From a Cenomi perspective, I would say, and what we are seeing in Saudi Arabia, is the rise of influencer marketing. This is singly the biggest trend that we are seeing within retail. And the exponential growth that we are seeing in influencer marketing really speaks volumes around how brands are now using influencer marketing to connect with the right consumers. You know, back in 2021, influencer marketing worldwide was worth about $10 billion US. By 2028, that's expected now to be worth around $85 billion. And what influencer marketing is showing us in Saudi is the relatability of the influencers that are being used really creates this immediate credibility with brands. And I am hugely proud, actually, to say that within Cenomi, we have recently used a wonderful Saudi lady by the name of Raha, who is not only the first Saudi, but the first Saudi female who has climbed Everest. And we have used her, actually, as an influencer within our broader fashion and beauty category. So that, for us, is a massive trend that is really totally shifting away from traditional marketing into a much more unique, much more relatable, credible-based marketing platform.
Wow, influencer marketing. Thank you, Mif. What a great example. Dan.
Thank you. For me, I feel that I really see an emerging trend around what I'm calling collaborative commerce, whereby, if I look back 5 years ago, people are increasingly trying to go direct to the consumer. So if you're a brand, you're trying to own and reach the consumer directly. And you're worried about disintermediation, and you think platforms like Amazon or Zalando or Tmall are potentially trying to disintermediate you and your consumer. And equally, on the other side of things, you're worried about Google and Facebook with Facebook Marketplace, again, trying to disintermediate you and your consumer. And it feels like you're trying to fight by yourself to find that consumer, own that consumer, and you're fighting with big global companies to do that. And I think actually what's happening now is retail's getting tougher. You know, when we look around the world, when you look in the UK, Europe, US, multi-channel retail, omnichannel retail, physical retail, it's getting tougher. Markets like the Middle East, it's booming. But actually, on a global perspective, retail's getting tougher. And I think what's that leading to is a greater sense and need for collaboration, and collaborating with your landlord partners, collaborating with your tech partners, collaborating with your marketing partners, and even embracing people that were previously might have been seen as your competitors, the Amazons, the eBays, the Zalandos, the Trendyols, potentially, if you're a brand, and actually needing to partner with them. Because we see that consumers are choosing to shop at fewer destinations. They have destinations that they want to go to, probably only a handful of destinations. And for me, a key trend in marketing is making sure that you're collaborating with the right partners who you might previously have viewed as your competitors to make sure that you're present where the consumer is today. Because if you're not present where the consumer is today, I don't think your brand will have relevance in the long term.
That's interesting. It reminds me of the basics of our business in shopping malls, which is partnership, right? Partnership between landlords, retailers, and collaborative marketing. That's very interesting. Thank you, Dan. Koral, what do you think?
I firstly echo both of these. I think collaboration, influencer marketing, but ultimately I think it's actually more of a provocation. Which is shopping centres, shopping malls, I think increasingly need to be seen as brands themselves. And I think we're living in an era of where often these shopping destinations are getting defined by the brands that they house and the people who rent from us. And ultimately, they're sitting in our space, and they are renting from us. And what that means is that there is a brand at the top that needs to be defined. And when we think about a shopping destination as a brand, that suddenly unlocks all of these things that have just been said today, which is, what are the influences that makes that brand relevant? What is the collaborations that that brand does? And number three, I guess, what are the values, the personality of that brand? How does it speak? How does it identify its audience? How does it know the local culture of the place that it sits? And so I think it's less of a trend. I think it's more of a provocation of where I believe we need to be going when we're talking about placemaking and marketing within that arena.
Placemaking, marketing, brand, personality. So I turn back to you, Mif. As a brand, Cenomi, how do you assess what success looks like when you roll out an innovation? Help us understand, how do you assess those trends when you're piloting them or testing them or implementing them?
Okay, I think the point Koral just made is an excellent one, in that, shopping centres have changed dramatically over the last 10 years. And there was always a wonderful phrase that I think anyone who's worked in any sort of retail industry, particularly in shopping centres, is build it and they will come. And I'm afraid to say that is no longer the case. If you build it, there is no guarantee that they will come. So success really now is about, and I think Dan mentioned it as well, and I hate to use the word omnichannel, because it has been used probably far too frequently over the last decade, but it is now about this, seamless experience that a customer will have. And whether they are in a physical shopping centre, a physical store, or the digital platform, what is becoming most successful now and what is really driving innovation is that physical retail environment that has a very clear and seamless omni-channel digital strategy that sits around it.
And with this omni-channel framework, Dan, I turn to you with a question on brand. How do you ensure that the brand vibe is consistent across all those platforms?
I think that's a challenge, and I think it becomes more complex in larger global organizations that don't just have different channels, but different partnerships, different platforms that they're selling through. I think that starts with everybody has to be clear on who your brand is, what your brand stands for, and what the values are, and ultimately what that value proposition is, both to the consumer and to your partner. So that starts internally to ensure that your organization is aligned by that, and then ensuring that your partners are aligned to that as well. But I think as you produce literally thousands of assets and you democratize and you empower local teams and channel owners and partners to take ownership of your brand, I think attempting to control that and make that uniform, I think is difficult. And actually, I think it's important that everybody understands the values, but also is empowered to represent your brand and to deliver your brand in market, in channel, in the most market appropriate way. And I think in order to really scale your brand today, you can't centralize and control that, because in large organizations, I think that's too big a task. And it's about making sure everybody understands who your brand is, but then empowering the teams inside your organization, outside your organization, inside your partner network to deliver that brand relevant locally, because the requirements in the UK are very different to the requirements in the Middle East and are very different to the requirements in the US.
So the last concept of localization is another challenge you're referring to. Koral, our brand experts, what do you think of these challenges? What other challenges do you think we're facing in this omni-channel world, and how do you think we can approach these?
I think we've got an obsession with selling, and I think we've got an obsession with ROI, and I think we talk about a proliferation of multi-channels and having this kind of unique mix, but I think it's okay to not have every single channel try and drive sales. I think it's okay to think about actually what does that look like in terms of a platform that entices loyalty. We had it in the previous speaker. How do we turn our customers into the previous speaker said fans, but we call it brand champions. And that's not about always driving sales. And I think that's also as Dan said, it's about an understanding of a nuance of what the brand stands for and what each channel can bring you. And I don't necessarily think we have to define the success of certain channels of if it drives sales. You know, it's media impressions, it's engagement, it's about, you know, then maybe footfall as well. You know, there is obviously sales there as a metric, but it's a consequential, longer journey about brand value. And I come back to that idea of brand, because brand value is this beautiful, untangible thing that we can't necessarily kind of touch. But that is the long-term kind of aim, I think, for brands, because as you said, Dan, you know, people are often now becoming more nuanced and choosy and picky on the brands that they keep within their circle, about who they engage with. And I think that means that actually we've got a duty as brands to think about how we play a role in their lives beyond just selling.
So you speak about direct and indirect sales.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. And in the world of shopping malls, we're all obsessed about customers, of course, but also sales. And we spoke about the complexity of our business due to the fact that we've got two customer segments. We've got the retailers, our partners, and we've got the consumers who actually shop in our malls. So let's talk about partnerships. I want to go back to the concept of partnership. I'd love to hear your thoughts about successful partnerships, Mif. Can you give us an example of what successful partnership looks like that can support the brand, the sales, and the partners?
The basic concept behind the most successful partnerships with retailers, I think, is in what we've just said, which is it is a partnership. And the world has moved on from where retailers can either demand one thing and landlords say, this is all you're going to get. You know, it is far too competitive, to the point Koral kind of just made as well. You know, customers are now completely channel agnostic. So how they shop, how they interact with brands, with retailers, it doesn't matter what channel. And that is an approach that landlords, shopping centre developers and retailers have to consider. And so what has created for us in Cenomi some of the best partnerships is where the retailer works hand in hand with us as either Cenomi Retail, the Kingdom's largest franchise partner, or Cenomi Centres. And there's probably a couple of examples. One, we've done a really interesting piece of work with Flying Tiger Copenhagen, which for anyone who has not been into a Flying Tiger Copenhagen store, I highly recommend you go and visit one, because it's a really fun store. I mean, I am about 40 years too old for the product categories in there. But the way they create the experience, you know, hand in hand with Cenomi Retail and with Cenomi Centres, has created actually quite a sort of theatrical type experience for customers in these stores. And where we are seeing some of the other more successful partnerships is moving beyond just a pure retail environment. And again, you know, to get consumers going back into physical shopping centres where for the last 3 years they've been just simply buying online, it has to be now the creation of this theatrical experience for customers. You know, it's not just a place where you go and buy something. So Alo Yoga, I think, are a super brand who do some really interesting things around, you know, creation of yoga studios, either in stores or as part of a sort of house retreat. And these are the sort of partnerships that we're now trying to create with retailers to move beyond just that physical store experience into, you know, something that people will come and spend time and money doing.
So that's a great example of experiential marketing brought to life through partnership.
Yeah.
Awesome. And obviously, everybody wants to jump on these innovations to be on trend, or to perhaps to set a trend. There's a lot of demand for us to be the first to go into the metaverse, the first to roll out a certain technology. We want to be brand. We want to be a trendsetter. But Koral, how do you think brands can be trendsetters? Is it through really riding the marketing trend, or to set a trend? Or what else?
I think there's a big difference between trends and data. And what I mean by data, I mean data insights. And trends is some of the things that we've talked about, bigger themes of where the industry is going or where brands are going. But when we look at data insights, I think that's the thing that's going to differentiate brands in future, because ultimately through data and data insights of our audience, we can understand cultural interests, cultural kind of strings that our audience are engaging in, they're interested in, and it's about the role that the brand plays within those cultural insights. So what we've done as a consultancy, so we work obviously with landlords, shopping centres, and one of the biggest themes that we're seeing is that they're increasingly looking to become more and more localised. How do they become more relevant, hyper-relevant to the people in their specific area? So what we did is we developed a tool, a data insights tool, and we called it Way In, and that's IIN. So interrogating culture, instigating stories, navigating change. And the power of this tool can take any single epicenter around the world, from London, New York, Shanghai, all the way through to smaller towns, maybe even a postcode. And we can do up to a 6-mile radius scrape of social media sites, review sites, credit card data. And we can understand, through analyzing millions of data points, people's interests, behavior, buying power, even down to the fact that they might like the color orange, they might be voting left in the next election, and the fact that they listen to this local band. This is real cultural undercurrent, what we're calling the cultural thread of any single area around the world. Now, put that into perspective of then what a shopping center or a brand then has to do to navigate what that looks like as becoming culturally relevant to that audience in that area. Suddenly we have the brands that we need to be engaging with, to do collaborations with, because that brand is unlocking that audience. It's already relevant to that audience. How do we collaborate with them to even bring them even further? We understand the influencers. These influencers are in this area. They're talking about these topics. They're the people we have to engage with. And suddenly it shifts the dial from using your social media platforms just to be talking about what you're selling into how do we create it as a platform for conversation and uniting our audience. It's not just a platform that we should be talking about product and events and this kind of utilitarian one way of speaking. Ultimately, what it should be kind of becoming is almost like a magazine. It should be telling a story. It should be becoming editorial. We understand this cultural narrative, this cultural interest of our audience. How do we make our social media platforms become that portal, that window, that engagement kind of platform to allow them to, become brand champions of the brands?
So we should listen, we should understand, and then we should engage accordingly.
Of course. I think there's often data insights. I know it's said years ago, but it's still being said today, data is the new oil. I think ultimately what we're looking for is who are the new petrol stations? Who's turning that data into usable material? And that's becoming basically a foundation. How do we use it as a foundation to create strategies and create amazing creative thinking and content which becomes relevant and hyper-relevant to that point, localized?
So how do you do it at Debenhams?
Good question. So I think a few things I wanted to pick up on. So Debenhams is the first department store anywhere in the world. It's over 245 years old, and it essentially invented this concept of multi-branded retailing, where actually you could go into a single physical retail location and buy multiple brands. And clearly over time that evolved as more department stores came online and shopping centres came online. So we trace the history of Debenhams back to being the grandfather, really, of multi-branded retailing and department store shopping. And I was just reflecting on the conversation about successful partnerships and the need to partnership rather than necessarily compete. Is if I look at Debenhams, we've got a hugely successful partnership in the Middle East with Al Shaya, fantastic partner for us. We've got stores across the region. And then I look at digitally as well, and we partnered with Al Shaya and Voga and Sixth Street, whereas previously we might have thought, oh, we can do that directly. We should ship cross-border from the UK. We don't want to be on a platform. Actually, platforms are competitors to us. But we focused on building partnerships and collaborations to ensure that we are present where the consumer is present and building through collaborations, a better business for everybody, because more consumers are experiencing the Debenhams brands, more consumers are shopping the Debenhams brands, and that in turn drives more people into the shopping centres where we have stores, which drives more people online to our own site or to our partner site. And so we're trying to create that partner ecosystem that everybody benefits from, because we bring great brands and products to our consumer, and we bring great collaborations to our partners, to the benefit of everybody. So that's just a great example of how we're partnering on multiple levels in the region, and we'd love to do it in other regions, and that's one of the reasons I'm here this week, for the benefit of everybody.
And could we consider this type of partnership an innovative trend, in your opinion?
I think it's changing. I think the concepts of partnering, particularly partnering with a brand or partnering with a landlord or a shopping centre developer, those partnerships have existed for decades and decades and decades. I think the partnerships are now becoming multi-level and more complicated, because as a department store, we are reliant upon third-party brands that we sell, but we're also then dependent upon our franchise partner in the region and the landlords and shopping centres in the region, but then a series of platforms that sit around that in the region as well. So I think partnerships used to be one-to-one, and now partnerships are one-to-many, and that creates greater opportunity, but also more complexity.
So we spoke about data as well, right? And I think my last question to all of you is, building on the data, building on this new way of partnering, listening to our consumers, how do you work your magic with data to spot and predict, which is even more difficult, and test trends? Everybody's very eager to hear your thoughts around that, because we're all very eager to test and pilot trends. How do you use data for that, based on your experience at Cenomi, at Debenhams, as a brand expert?
Okay, so from Cenomi's perspective, we obviously use data, as everybody here on the panel probably does as well, and other analytical methods to look at performance of marketing campaigns, the impact on retailers, and where our focus very much now is around moving towards loyalty. And I know loyalty is not something unique at all, but it is relatively new within the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And we now have in Cenomi a loyalty program of over 600,000 members. And those 600,000 members give us incredibly rich insight around how are they spending time, how are they getting to our shopping centres, what retail stores are they buying in, where are they earning points, where are they burning points, and we can then take that data source and essentially build on that. We can use that as a test and learn platform for either new marketing initiatives, for new potential retail partners coming into our organisation. So that really is giving us a pretty solid base now on which we can create test cells for various initiatives across our business.
Wow, 600,000 members. That's fantastic. Dan, how are you testing, predicting, and piloting innovations at Debenhams?
I think there's a few things in there. I think one on data, there's a danger that you get overwhelmed by data, because actually so much data is produced from so many sources now. It's really important that it's consumable and actionable, and that you can really understand what you should do with that data and the so what's around that data, because I think there's been a huge drive towards we need more data, but that data's become overwhelming. Actually, you need consumable and actionable data that across the whole organisation you can act upon. And my observation is that actually that data maturity is getting much, much better, but the ability to act on that data quickly is absent from most organisations. The agility to be able to see data this morning and do something that afternoon and to put that live the next day, I think that's absolutely critical. You've got to have that data and insight, but paired with that agility. And I think that agility is much, much harder to achieve. It is potentially relatively easier to achieve in the digital arena than it is in the physical arena. And at Debenhams, we charge ourselves with testing 50 improvements to the digital consumer experience every single day.
Every day?
Every single day. And we want to be running 50 experiments as a minimum at any one time, testing our hypotheses, testing trends, to see what catches on. And that's informed by data, but a point of difference for us is our agility and our ability to execute that quickly at scale. And I think there's a lot of focus on data, but the agility to act upon that data in hours or days rather than months or years is how you gain competitive advantage.
And next year you're going to say by the second, not hours and days.
Yes.
Wow. Koral, at the Ready House, with your system and your listening tools, how are you doing with your clients?
I think you said the key word, which is predictive. I think we sit in a realm of where we analyze a lot of post-purchase, visitation type of data to understand actually how do we improve maybe the physical store experience or the website based on how they've engaged, or maybe it's a social media post to understand if it's gained traction or not. And I think we should be in an era of where we should be looking and becoming more predictive by looking at the data pre-engagement with our brand, to understand the cultural data of our audience, as I said before, in order to do one thing and one thing only, which is mitigate risk. How do we mitigate risk within our strategies, within our content, within our store experience, within our websites, to make sure it's becoming hyper-relevant to the right people, and we're making an experience, and in my opinion, for the longer term, not necessarily just short, sharp revenue spikes, but for the longer term to understand that we're building a strategy that is becoming relevant to our audiences. I'll tell you an example, if we've got time, which is we actually did a data scrape of one of our centres in Poole, which is on the south coast of England. And the shopping centre there is called the Dolphin Shopping Centre. And we understood that their income brackets of the people in Poole were between 55 and 75,000 pounds in the area. You've got some really nearby kind of affluent areas like Sandbanks. And actually, when we looked at the credit card data of the shopping mall, it was 15 to 25,000 pounds. So there was a real disparity between who was shopping at the mall and who was in the area, meaning the offers, the events, the language, the retailers weren't speaking the language of the people in the area. So one of the things that we did in this strategy that we built was interrogating the events that they should do. We understood through this data scrape that they were slightly more affluent, they loved rum, they loved grilled fish, they loved this local band, and they loved, obviously, being by the sea. So what did we do? We approached a rum brand, Mount Gay Rum, which is an island-based rum in Barbados. We then started playing the band in the background. We put on an event of a local fishmongers that provided grilled fish with a rum kind of taster, cocktail maker there. We designed the menus because we knew that they loved the colour orange. We designed the menus with hints of orange. It became the best and most ticketed and most attended event that they had put on as a centre because it spoke the language. Now, people could deem that as almost hacking your audience, but it's actually because it's speaking their interest, it's speaking their cultural kind of fabric, to understand how it becomes more relevant. And that's the way how you can use data. And I know that's a very kind of A to Z kind of simplification almost, but it was just one of the components within a strategy of how does it become relevant to be able to, by the way, a shopping centre putting on an event with grilled fish and rum, it's not necessarily something that a shopping centre would often do, but trust me, that those people then ended up picking up their prescription or going to Costa to get a coffee or whatever it was, because shopping for our shopping centre was a byproduct of the idea of what we put on as an event and the language that we started speaking. We could have, in the past, just said, come and get your coffee from Costa. But what we had to do is entice them and speak to them in a language that they understood, that they knew, that they wanted to be a part of, to then understand that the visitation, the idea of why you're there, is also a byproduct to go and pick up your prescription or something more utilitarian.
Thank you for the example. This was quite insightful. And I'm happy that we spoke about trends without necessarily talking about robots or metaverse. Because at the end of the day, we do all this as a tool to attract the customer to our malls and to experience our brands. Thank you very much, Mif, Dan, Koral. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your insights. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.